Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another brief social studies presentation. Before we get started, I want to remind us of some good note-taking tips. First, make sure you're listening to everything that's being said, and you're not writing down everything that you see on the slides, you're only keeping track of the most important information. As you watch, feel free to pause the video at any time, and let's get started. Before we can talk about the two terms that you see on the slide here, we have to talk about two other vocabulary terms that we should definitely know moving forward, and those are raw materials and refined or refined materials. These two terms are very simple to understand. A raw material is simply a material that is unprocessed or not changed. For example, wool is a raw material. It's something that's unprocessed or not changed. It's just wool. A refined material is something that is processed or has been changed. For instance, if you take that wool and make it into clothing, the clothing is the refined material or the changed material. Wool is raw material, it's just wool. Clothing is refined material, it's been changed into clothes. By understanding these two terms, you could better understand one of our major vocabulary words of the day, and that is mercantilism. Mercantilism is simply the process in which raw materials, or unprocessed materials, are bought for a very low price by a country from its colony, refined or changed, and sold back to that colony that it got the raw materials from, generally for a profit. So for instance, if we look at England and its 13 colonies, England might buy 500 pounds of wool from its colonies for $1 a pound, refine those materials and turn it into clothing, and then sell 500 pounds of clothing back to its colonies for $5 a pound. At this rate, England is making $400 in profit per that order, and as a result, England is making money. Mercantilism and that idea of making money from your colonies was something that was very popular amongst all European countries with colonies in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. The idea is the more wealth going into your country, the more powerful you're getting, and the less wealth coming in, the less powerful you're getting. The idea is that you want to make the mother country, in this case England, powerful. So for instance, England wanted to export or sell more goods than it imported or bought from other places. And this is illustrated in the center picture on your screen. The idea is you want to export more than import. You want to sell more than you buy. And as a result, you're making money. Colonies were created by these countries in order to be a source of raw materials, in order to become profitable for the mother country. If you look at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you can see an illustration of this. The colonies would provide raw materials, maybe fur, lumber, and other materials, to the mother country for a low price. The mother country would manufacture those into some sort of product or refined material, and then sell it back to the colonies for a profit. As a result of this, the mother country, maybe England, would become very, very rich at the expense of its colonies. England over time realized that this could be a very beneficial system, and they could become very rich because of this. In order to keep a strict control over their colony, England passed a series of very restrictive or one-sided laws known as the Navigation Acts. That's a very important term to know. Throughout the 1660s, 1670s, all the way into the 1700s, colonists in the 13 colonies could only conduct business on English or colonial-made ships. And as a result of that, goods had to be sent to England first before they could be sent anywhere else, so that England could tax those goods and make money off of them. Interesting enough, very valuable raw materials such as tobacco, sugar, and timber, and cotton, they could only be traded with England. So if I were, say, Virginia, and I wanted to trade with France, and I wanted to trade them cotton, I could not do that because England was the only country that I could trade with. So these navigation acts were very, very limiting for the 13 colonies. And this is a cool kind of comic that sort of illustrates that. Feel free to pause the video and read the comic that illustrates the navigation acts. In addition to this, colonies weren't even allowed to build their own factories in the New World. England could only be the ones who had factories so that they can control business. If England allowed the colonies to make factories, then that raw material, say wool, could be refined in the colonies and sold to the colonies. But that wouldn't give England enough power. In this case, England was the only party here with factories, and as a result, those raw materials had to be shipped to England to be refined before they could be sold back for a profit. However, with these navigation acts, these trade regulations, they weren't really enforced all that well because remember, England is 3,000 miles away. So as a result, England didn't keep a close eye on these rules, and because of this, a lot of smuggling and piracy took place in order to smuggle illegal goods in and out of the 13 colonies to avoid the taxation that the British were putting on these goods and to avoid only having to trade with England. This idea of England not strictly enforcing the Navigation Acts is a term called salutary neglect, also a great term to know. This neglect, this England avoiding enforcing the Navigation Acts, this neglect, led the colonies to enjoy a sense of free trade. They thought that they could trade however they wanted because they were so neglected by the British. However, in 1763, England began to enforce these laws, which kind of, ticked the colonists off a little bit. The colonists were not happy that the English all of a sudden started to pay attention to the Navigation Acts, and this is one of the conflicts that really led to the American Revolution, America breaking away from England, the fact that England is all of a sudden starting to enforce these acts. One of the results of mercantilism is this idea of triangular trade, illustrated on the right side of the screen here. Triangular trade was a system in which slaves were purchased on the African Gold Coast, shipped to the New World, and from there raw materials were sent to England, and England would manufacture those goods and sell them out again. And this system was continuous. It just kept going and going and going. The image on the right side of the screen is a pretty good idea. It gives you a pretty good idea of what's going on, but it's not entirely accurate. This image is a little more accurate, and you can see the different places that items were traded across the ocean. You had slaves going from Africa to the New World in this middle passage, something that we're going to talk a little more about. You had sugar, raw goods in general, going from the Caribbean to the New World and the New World to England. And then England would take those manufactured goods and sell them back to the New World for a profit, or sell them to Africa for a profit as well. England is greatly benefiting here because they're buying raw materials, raw goods at a low price, and then selling them for a high price. They have a little bit of money going out and a lot of money going in. So this is a really cool image that you can sort of sear into your brain a little bit. This idea of the Middle Passage describes the route that slaves took from Africa to the New World, and it's one of the most harrowing systems that mankind has ever devised. If you look at the image here, you can see where slaves were traded out of Africa to the New World, most going to Brazil, which the Portuguese controlled, but a lot going to North America as well. Between 1451 and 1870, almost 10 million slaves were traded along this Middle Passage, and a whole lot of them, a great percentage of them, died in the crossing. It really was a terrible crossing and something that we've learned a little bit about already in class. But it is important that we know the term Middle Passage and that it was a result of mercantilism and this triangular trade, and it resulted in the enslavement of close to 10 million slaves, African slaves, with a large percentage going to the British colonies. If you have any questions at all, make sure you rewind the video and take a look at maybe something that you missed. But if you think you know it all pretty well, try and answer these 4 questions on the screen. If you can answer those 4 questions and you can explain what these terms are, then you are good to go with the information on this presentation. Thanks for watching. Great job.